Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you guys how to create complex patterns easily in GIMP. This is GIMP version 2.10.10, which at the time of this tutorial is the latest version of GIMP. But of course, before we get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in my best-selling GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. And you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon, and I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. Alright, so for today's tutorial, I'll be showing you how to create patterns such as this one here. If I hold Control and zoom in, you can see this is actually a decently intricate pattern. I mean, it's pretty easy to create as the title of this video suggests, but it does look fairly complicated here. And I actually created a few different patterns, so let me just hide this pattern layer here. This was another variation of that same pattern that I created. And if I hide that one, you can see on the left we've got a cube pattern. On the right we have another pattern here, which is kind of a variation of that first pattern. And if I hide that layer, and let me actually just disable this layer mask real quick, there's another pattern that I created there. So as I stated, it's pretty simple to create patterns in GIMP, even complex patterns. So I've been creating a lot of pixelated looking patterns, as you guys can see here. Those, I think, are the easiest to create in terms of creating something with complexity, especially at a smaller size, a smaller pattern size. So let's dive in here to GIMP, and again, I'm using the latest version, GIMP 2.10.10, and your pattern section should be over here on the right side of your GIMP. So you can see a bunch of patterns here. These top ones are the custom ones I just created for this tutorial, and then all of these are going to be ones that come with GIMP by default. So you guys should have all of these patterns up until about this one. And if your pattern dialog or your pattern dock is not open, you can go to Windows, Dockable Dialogs, and come down here to Patterns, and you can see there's a little shortcut key to open that up. When you click on that, it should open it up over here. If not, you can always click and drag it into place down here. But you can click and hold your mouse to preview the full-size pattern here, and you can see the name of the pattern and then the dimension of the pattern. So this one is 96 by 96 pixels. The ones I've created are all 100 by 100, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So if I click and hold this without dragging it, you can see a preview of that full pattern. So this is what the pattern design looked like before I filled it in to the entire composition here. So this one was a 3D cube with no background. And I'll be showing you guys how to export your compositions as proper pattern files, and then how to move those into the pattern folder so that GIMP will recognize it. So let's start with the design of our pattern first. And I'm going to come over here and go to File, New, and I'm going to create a new composition. And I'm actually just going to create this as a 100 by 100 composition. So I just hit the Tab key to switch between my width and my height. And I do want my unit set to pixels here. I'm just doing 100 by 100 because it's easier to section a composition of those dimensions into individual pixel units. You'll see what I'm talking about in a second here. So I'll click OK, and that will create my new composition. I'll hold Control and zoom in. So you do want to start with whatever background you're ultimately going to want the background of your pattern to be. Again, you can just hide the background and have this be a transparent background and then save this as a pattern file. It will save it without the background, and we'll get into that later. But I do want a background for the particular type of pattern that I'm going to be drawing today. So I'm going to use my bucket fill tool, make sure the fill type is set to foreground color fill, and in this case I'm going to experiment with a blue background so you guys can copy my HTML notation here. And I'll go ahead and fill this in. So now we have the background of our pattern. The next thing I want to do in this case, since I do want to create a pixel sort of pattern, I'm going to add a grid to my composition. So to do that, I'm going to go to View, Show Grid, and that's going to show my grid here on my composition. You'll notice the grid is fairly small. I did set this up to be a 1 pixel grid, so each square inside of this grid equals 1 pixel. And you guys can change that yourselves by going to Edit, Preferences, and then under Default Grid, you've got an option here for spacing. So if you set this to 1 by 1 for the horizontal and the vertical, that'll be 1 pixels, so a 1 pixel grid. This may by default be set to 10 or 100 or something like that. So after you have changed these values to 1, and by the way, it shows you the value in inches below that, you can ignore that, or you can change that to whatever value you want, whatever unit you want. But once you've set that, just click OK. You will have to close GIMP down and reopen it for those changes to take effect. But the next time you open up your grid, it will show up as a 1 pixel grid in my case, if that's what you're going for. So the next step here is we want to add some guides to this. That's just going to help us properly place our designs and make it easier to make our designs symmetrical, which is really a big part of creating patterns. So to do that, I'm first going to create center guides and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to go to Image, Guides, New Guide by percent to start, and I'm going to set the direction to vertical first and the position of 50% and click OK. That'll create a vertical guide down the exact center of our composition. And I'll create another one, but I'm going to make this one horizontal. So I'll go to Image, Guides, New Guide by percent, and I'll change this to horizontal now and click OK. So now we have our center guides, but what I want to do is also create guides to separate the rest of the design from the edges of my pattern, because when you're drawing a pattern, it's going to have to repeat itself, and if the edges are asymmetrical, it's going to screw up the pattern. So you want the edges of your composition to be symmetrical. So this is my easy way of doing that. So I'm going to come over here to Image, Guides, New Guide, and I'm going to set this first to 10 because I just want this being 10 pixels from the edge. And I'll start with my vertical direction first and click OK. And then I'll come over to Image, Guides, New Guide again, and this one I'm going to set to 90. And so we're going to do the same thing. These are the vertical guides. We're going to do the same for horizontal. So Image, Guides, New Guide. And I'm just going to change this to horizontal. That'll give us one at the bottom. Image, Guides, New Guide. And we'll make this one horizontal again and change this to 10. Click OK. All right, so now we've got some guides laid out. This is going to make it easy for us to work within our pattern for GIMP and again make it symmetrical. So I'm going to start with the center shape here, so like the main shape. And I'm going to do that by coming over here and creating a new layer. And I'll just name this main shape and click OK. So next we need to decide what we want our main shape to be, and I like this diamond shape over here on this other composition, so I'm just going to emulate that. I'm just sort of inverting the colors here for this particular pattern we're working on though. So I'll come back over to my original composition, and I'm going to come over here and grab my selection tool. So I'll grab my rectangle select tool, and what I did originally was I just drew a random rectangle. And by the way, I do have everything snapping to the grid, which means that if I hold Control and zoom in, you'll see this line is snapping to that exact line on my grid. And make sure you have that set up by coming over here to View, Snap to Grid. So make sure that option is checked. Actually, mine was not checked, so it's a good thing we did that. So that just ensures that everything you're drawing is going to snap to your grid and therefore be aligned with all the pixels in the grid. So now I'll hold Control and zoom in. So next I'll come down here and you'll see the size is set to 71 by 74, so it's not a perfect rectangle, and it's also a little bit too big. So I'm going to change this value to 60, and I'll also change this value to 60. Make sure you're clicked on your rectangle when you do that part so that it properly resizes there. And then I can click and drag this and it should snap to the guides there. So that'll give us a perfectly centered rectangle or square in this case. And now I want to rotate this so that it's more of a diamond shape. And to do that, I'm going to come over here to my rotate tool. And under the transform options, I'm going to change it from layer to selection here. So the second option. And I'm just going to click and drag this, and that allows us to transform the selection. So I do actually want this to be an exact 45 degrees. So I'll just change the angle to 45. And I'll hit rotate. And that'll rotate our shape. Now you want to hold Control and zoom in and make sure that your shape is aligned with the pixels on the grid and is perfectly centered, which this one is. So I'll zoom out using Control and my mouse wheel and then just zoom back in a little bit there. So now we can draw our main shape, and we'll do that by grabbing the bucket fill tool, and I'm going to hit X on my keyboard to grab my yellow color, and you guys can copy this color right here. And by the way, I'm getting these colors from a custom palette I created over here. I actually created this in my isometric building tutorial. If you want this palette, I'll make it available for download on my website. So now I'll come over to my layers panel here, and I still have my bucket fill tool selected, and I'm going to fill in this square or this diamond now. And that's going to give us this nice yellow color. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shrink this selection area so that we can erase a little bit of a chunk in the middle here. So to do that, I'll go to Select, Shrink, and I'll shrink this by 10 pixels to see how it looks at first. So I'll click OK. So I'm going to hit Control Z. I'm going to shrink it a little bit more here. So Select, Shrink. Let's go with 15 and click OK. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to hit the Delete key. And I'm actually going to shrink this one more time just because I think it adds a little bit of dimension to have another shape inside here. So I'm going to go to Select, Shrink, and I'm going to shrink this one by 3 pixels this time and click OK. And with my bucket fill tool selected, I'll fill this in and hit Control-Shift-A. So now we've got this cool diamond design, and then we've got a diamond inside of the diamond. So next what I'm going to do is start adding some custom shapes in here, and this is just going to add a little bit of dimension to our pattern. So I'm going to come over here and create a new layer, and I'm going to name this custom shape and hit the Enter key. And now I'm going to be drawing on individual pixels, and the best way to do that without there being blurred edges is to use the pencil tool. So I'll come over here to my pencil tool, and I'll hold Control and zoom in. So I'm going to start with the center shape here. And I'm going to come over and grab my orange color. You guys can copy my HTML notation there, and I'll click OK. Again, this is inside that custom palette I created here. And now I'm just going to draw a random shape in the center. And so what I like to do is just sort of count out the pixels I'm drawing as I'm drawing them. So we've got 3, 4, 5 rows of pixels here. I'll do the same down here just to make it nice and uniform. And then we've already got 1 row here, so I'll go 2, and that's 5. There we go. So we've got this plus sign in the middle here, and now I'm just going to add a little bit of shapes here to the outer edge of the plus sign. And you can see that my pencil is drawing individual pixels nice and cleanly, and it's also snapping to that grid so everything's nice and aligned. There we go. And if you want, you can even add another little shape here. I'm just making random shapes for this pattern design here, but I'll hold Control and zoom out. So next what I'll do is I'm going to draw another rectangle, and I'm going to draw some of these pixels inside of that rectangle. You'll see why I'm doing that in a second here. So I'll grab my rectangle select tool, and I'm just going to draw this here. And this time I'm going to decrease the size to about 40. And I'm just going to click and drag this now. But I'll grab my pencil tool again. So now we have this shape here, and this is allowing us to determine where we can draw each of these pixels so that they're nice and symmetrical across our entire pattern shape. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just drew that shape right there. So we're going to emulate that throughout the entire pattern here, all 4 sides. And as per usual, you can make these shapes a little bit more complex here. All right, so we've got a nice shape there, so I'll hit Control-Shift-A. My advice is to not draw too many shapes on the same layer in case you want to either duplicate them or you want to go back and erase something. So I'm going to leave this custom shape layer as it is. I can show and hide this layer so you guys can see what's on this layer exactly. And now I'm going to create a new layer, and this time I'm going to name this vertical shapes, and we're going to start drawing some vertical shapes here on the edge. And make sure this is filled with transparency, by the way, and click OK. So I'll hold Control and zoom out, and I'm going to come over here to the edge, and I'm going to stay on the middle of my guides here. You guys can draw more guides if you'd like to create more shapes along the edges of your patterns. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just draw a random shape that can be repeated on the other side. So you basically want to create, again, a symmetrical shape where the same things are happening on one side as are happening on the other. That way when one side ends, it just continues on to the other side. You'll see why that makes sense once we draw the pattern. So hold Control and zoom in. So I'm just going to draw 4 pixels on each side of the guide here and just sort of round this off like so. So it's almost like a pyramid shape. And I'm just going to fill this in here. And then I'll come over on the other side and do the same thing. So we'll go 4 pixels on either side of the guides, and then click to draw it upwards. And make sure I get that pixel, and then just fill it in. And then again, we can make this a little bit more complex by drawing some other shapes right here. I'll go with that. And then maybe I'll repeat that over here. So hold Control and zoom in. And if you zoom in too far, it might screw up the way your pencil looks, so you might have to zoom out a bit. Hold Control and zoom out. So now I'll create a new layer, and I'll name this one Horizontal Shapes. So I'll come over here, create a new layer, and change the name of it to Horizontal. And click OK. And I'm going to change the color for this one, so I'll come over to my color palette, and let's just search for a different color here. So let's go with this purple. So I'll hold Control and zoom in. So I'm going to draw another shape up top here. Let me come back to my layers panel and make sure I'm on the right layer. And by the way, if you don't have any of these panels, you can always go to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and all of your different panel types are there. And really any of your missing docs are going to be inside of here. So I'll come back here, so let's create a different type of shape. So this time I'm going to do more of a square shape. So I'll come 4 pixels out again, and I'm going to click and just draw a square, like so. So this is all spaced the same. Let me just come over here and change my color to this pinkish purple and add a little shape in here. And maybe add some like that. So hold Control and zoom out. So we have a couple options here. We can manually redraw this like we did with the vertical designs to make sure everything shows up symmetrical, or we can just duplicate the side and then flip it over so that everything we do on the top portion of the image, for example, will then be flipped over to the bottom portion. So that's what we're going to do here, but first I'm just going to finish adding a couple more elements to this design. So I'll come back over here to my layers panel. And I'm just going to continue drawing shapes because I am going to be flipping this. And actually, let me just grab another color. Let me go with green this time. So hold Control and zoom in. So let's say maybe we'll go 5 pixels over. And by the way, the size of my pencil is set to 10 right here. So if you guys want to draw individual pixels like mine, you do have to set your pencil size there to 10. And I'm just going to draw this out like so. So we've got a little pyramid design there. And then I can come over and do the same thing over here. And we can add another random element to this design, so maybe just a couple dark green specks here. Almost looks like a tree. All right, so we've got these patterns up top. So now what I'll do is I'll come over here to my layers panel and I'll duplicate this layer. And then I'm going to come over here to my transformation tool. So this is the flip tool here. And I'm going to make sure this is set to the proper direction, so I'll set this to vertical. And you can see my arrows are pointing up and down, so if I click once on this layer, you'll see that will flip our duplicated layer so that all of our elements are now copied over here to the bottom. And that gives us a nice symmetrical pattern design here. And so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add an X through the entire design, and what that'll do is it's going to basically make our design have a continuing diamond pattern throughout everything, almost like an Argyle sweater would. So I'll come over here, create a new layer, and I'll name this X pattern. Click OK. And I'm going to drag this below all the other pattern layers, and I'll release that right there. Hold Control and zoom out. So the color of this X is up to you guys, but I'm going to come over here and grab a lighter blue. So come over to the pencil tool. I think these are actually the same color, so let's actually go with a darker blue here. And now all you have to do is hold Control and zoom in. Click on the top leftmost pixel, hold Control and zoom out. Use the spacebar to move over. Hold Control and move in here, zoom in. And go to the bottom rightmost pixel, hold the Shift key to enter straight line mode, and click. And that should draw a nice straight line through your entire design, creating that X. And now we can do the same thing over here, so hold Control and zoom in with the mouse wheel, not too much, so right there. And so I clicked once and hold Control, zoom out, move over to this side of my design, hold the Shift key, click, and now we have that X there. All right, so we have our nice complicated pattern here. We now need to export this as a pattern file type, and that's going to allow us to add this to our pattern section and then use it with tools like the bucket fill tool. So that's pretty easy to do. What we'll do is we'll come over here to File and go to Export As. And you can pretty much choose whatever folder at this point. So I'm going to type in complex diamond pattern. And you want to make sure you end this as a .pat file type and click Export. It's going to ask you what you want the name of your pattern to be, so you can name this whatever you want. It usually takes the name of the file name you created up here and just copies it right here. So now I'll hit Export, and we aren't quite done yet. Now what we need to do is move our .pat pattern file into the GIMP pattern file where it's drawing these patterns from. And you can find out where that is by coming over here to Edit, Preferences, and then you're going to scroll down to the bottom here to Folders. And you do want to expand the folders icon here. So click that plus icon, come over to the patterns section. And so here you have the location of the pattern. So I'll click on that. And now I can copy this location here. So I'll hit Control C and hit cancel. And then I'll open up my file finder here, my finder window, if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to click on just a random file folder. And then come up here Click on this and it's going to allow you to select the name of your file location and then just hit Control V and then hit the Enter key, and that'll take you straight to that location, which in this case was already the pattern location. And then you need to open up another file window here and navigate to whatever folder you saved that pattern in. So here is our pattern we saved. Now you can click on that and I'll hit Control X to cut that, and then come over here and hit Control V. You can also just click and drag it in here. So now we have that pattern here. So I'll come back to GIMP and I'm going to hit the refresh button and that'll refresh my patterns. And now you can see here is that pattern we just created, and make sure I don't click and drag. And now if I come over here to my composition I was using to test my patterns, I'll come over here and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll just name this new pattern and click OK. And I'm going to click and drag this pattern up to the top, grab my bucket fill tool, make sure I set the fill type to pattern fill, and then I can come over here and click on that pattern I want to use and then click inside here to fill it. And here we have our new pattern. If I hold Control and zoom in, you can see the details of the pattern here. So you can see that we had cut this off right here, but we had replicated the pattern on the other side of the pattern. And so what that does is it just creates a nice symmetrical pattern here, and everything flows into one another pretty seamlessly. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, you could subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can enroll in my best-selling GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. And you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And I'll include a link to that as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.